Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Getting back to work on the Gladiator in this video. If you've been following along, when I was doing the rear suspension, noticed that my brake pads were pretty worn down, so this video is going to be some brake upgrades on the truck. I've got pads, I've actually got extended lines, because another part of that video was that I'd maxed out the factory lines. So I am going to be doing four-wheel brake pads, four-wheel brake lines, and then walk through bleeding. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and get the camera turned around and walk through the process. So first part of this video has to do with bleeding the brakes. I normally am working on things by myself, so I normally do the bleeding of brakes by myself using a motive bleeder. The way the power bleeder is designed, you can use it two ways. You can actually fill that jug up with brake fluid, then pressurize it, and it should actually automatically refill as you are draining. I just use it to pump up and pressurize the master cylinder and just manually fill up as I'm going, because I don't want to have to worry about cleaning brake fluid out of this thing and having it deteriorate stuff over time. So that seems to work the best way for me. As far as this goes though, they do not offer an adapter for Jeep Chrysler products. They have Ford, they have GM, but nothing for Chrysler. So what I have done is gotten a spare brake cap, and I'm going to drill it out and make an adapter. Basically what I need is something along these lines, something that'll screw on to the master cylinder, and then that fitting hooks up to this hose here. And then you can pump it up and pressurize the master cylinder, and then when you open the bleeder, it should push all of the brake fluid through, and you can bleed the brakes that way and get all the air bubbles out. Setup works great. I've used it multiple times on multiple cars, and I absolutely love this setup. Makes doing brakes one person very easy. So what I've done is I've gotten some fittings, and I've got that cap, and I'm going to go ahead and make a tool. So I'm going to get everything together and start making this thing so it'll work. All right, again, here's what I'm working with. I got some 1/4 inch heavy duty flex hose. I have a 1/4 inch barb that I will use in the center of this cap, and then I have a 1/4 inch hose barb that will match up with the bleeder fitting there, and then a couple of hose clamps. So I'm gonna go ahead and drill this in the center for this, and then I'm gonna go ahead and use some sealer, seal it in place. The way you do this is you pump it up to basically 5 to 10 psi. Nothing more, because your reservoir is plastic. You don't want to explode the plastic with too much pressure. So it doesn't have to hold that much pressure, just has to be enough to be able to force the fluid through. So I think just using some good sealer should do the job. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that drilled out and get the barb installed. And here's the finished product. So what I ended up using is drilled it out, and I used a 1/8 pipe thread tap, so I could put some threads in here, so that worked actually pretty well. And I was able to screw this in, make sure everything fit, pulled it back out, and then I put the Right Stuff gray on the threads, put it in, and then I also, with a Q-tip, just ran a bead around the inside of it. So I'm gonna let this cure overnight. And then, as you can see, I took the seal out. I'll just have to cut out a hole in the center of that seal there. And then I can put this together, and then it's just going to be a matter of cutting, some hose and installing the hose on, or the barbs on the hose, tweaking it down with the clamps, and we will have a tool to pressurize the braking system for bleeding the brakes with one person. So I'm gonna let this sit. I'll come back tomorrow. All right, next day, everything is dry. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut a length of hose, probably about 12 inches or so. That should be plenty. And then I'll go ahead and assemble this, the hose, 2 barbs and clamps, and then I will have my tool ready to go to get my brakes bled. And there we have it. The adapter tool is made. Everything is tightened up as far as the clamps go. I also put this seal back in and did cut out the center there, so there's no obstruction for the pressure line. So all set there. So next on the list, now that I have my tool ready, is going to be to get the car up, or the truck up in the air, get the wheels off, and then I can start doing the brakes. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the jack and get everything ready to go. All right, truck is now up on jack stands, all 4 corners, wheels are off and everything, so we are ready to go. So what I'm gonna do is start with the rear I'm going to do all the pads first, because after doing each one, since I have to compress the caliper, I'm going to go in the cab, push down on the brake pedal just to push the caliper back out so I don't have any overflow of fluid in the engine bay from the master cylinder by compressing all the calipers and just shoving it out up and over the edge. So one by one I'm going to go through it. So I'm going to go grab the pads and the tools and start on the passenger rear. And then real quick before I get started, here's what's going in. We've got lines from EVO. Those are the front lines that are extended and the rear lines that are extended. You can see the part numbers accordingly. And as far as the pads, I'm going with Hawk LTS pads on all four corners. These are the fronts, and these are the rears. So you have part numbers if you need them. From what I've read, these are pretty good upgrade. They'll give you a little bit more stopping power, a little more consistent feel over the stock ones. And I've always run Hawk on my other vehicles and always been really happy with them. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the passenger rear. Pretty straightforward. You just have 2 bolts that go through. It's 10 mil on the head here, and then this is an 18 mil to hold it if it starts spinning, which it most likely will. So get those loosened, and then I'm also going to disconnect these clips from the brake line that are holding the ABS line to it, get those out of the way, and then I should be able to go ahead and pull the caliper off. And caliper's off, pretty straightforward. And if you look, you can see in comparison to a new pad just how worn down those are. There's really only about an 1/8 inch, maybe a little more of material left on the stock pads, so definitely at the end of their life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use actually the inside pad and a C-clamp to compress the caliper back into place, get the new pads installed, and then get the caliper put back in place. Back in a minute. Alright, here you can see I have everything compressed back all the way. This is how I did it, just clamp and the old brake pad, so that worked pretty good. I'm going to go ahead, use a wire brush, just clean up a few things, and then I can go ahead, take the new pads, get a little lubricant on them, and get them installed. And there we are, everything reinstalled on this side. You can see I put lube where the pad slides in the little channel there, and then also the faces of the pads where they hit the caliper on this side, underneath those sides, and then on the back side where the actual piston pushes against the caliper, I put lube on the entire circumference of the piston. So everything's installed. Again, these are tiny bolts, just tighten them so they're snug. I don't remember what the exact torque spec is. I just, again, tighten them till they're snug, nothing too crazy. I also did pull the sliders out and just make sure everything was pretty good. There was no debris or anything in there. They were sliding fine, so not too worried about those. So I'm gonna go ahead, get in the cab, push the brake pedal to the floor just to push the piston out, move the fluid, and then I can go ahead and get to work on the driver's side. All right, and driver's side rear done, new brakes installed. One thing I did forget to mention previously, these pads from Hawk do not have the wear tab that the stock ones do, so as they do wear down, they're not going to start screeching like crazy. So that basically means that all 4 pads are exactly the same, so there's no differences in the pads. But like I said, same as the other side, lubed everything up, checked the sliders, made sure nothing was binding. So we are all set on the rear. Time to move to the front. All right, passenger front, and you can see I already have the caliper off. Pretty straightforward. 2 bolts. Those are 13 millimeter heads. And then instead of being like a hexagon, they just have a square on these sliders. I think it's a 24 mil. I didn't have to use anything on it. It came off, but I did grab one of my 22s just thinking that might be it, and that was too small. So it's probably a 24 in case you are going to need it, or just an open-ended wrench or adjustable crescent wrench will work or whatever. But anyway, you can see these pads are worn down pretty good as well. Not as bad as the rear, but definitely lesser than they were when they were new. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the new box of pads and grease, and then I can get to work on compressing the 2 pistons in this caliper and get the pads swapped over. And here are the new pads, and you can see these are different. 2 have the wear indicators, 2 do not. So if you look at the factory setup, I believe the wear indicators are on the back. I'll know for sure once I pull the pads out, but yeah, you can see how worn down those are in comparison to those. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the old pads out and get new ones installed. All right. pistons compressed back in. I used, like I said, the old brake pad, same as the rear. Just being that it's 2 pistons, you know, I normally start on this side, get this one in a little bit, then walk over here. Once they start going, you can normally just push in on one side and use your hand and actually clamp down the other side, and they normally go in together pretty well. So everything has been seated. I'm gonna just clean that up and then also use a wire brush to clean the mounting areas for the pads, get the pads lubed just like I did on the rears, and get everything installed. All right, everything's back together and lubed up, same as I did the rear. Put lube on the underside of these 3 tabs on this side of the caliper, both pistons on the other side, and then the channels where everything goes. Check to make sure the sliders moved freely, and they did, and then just got everything nice and snug. As far as the pads go, all of these pads from Hawk, the fronts, do have wear indicators on all of them. So I oriented it where the wear indicator is on the bottom, because that's where the one was on the rear on this side. So I just matched that up. So there was none on the front side, but there was one on the rear. So that is how I set it up. You can see, actually no, I apologize, there was one on the front, and that should be up at the top. So yeah, the front one, here's the old pad, or no, I'm sorry. The back has it at the bottom because this was the back pad here. It's at the bottom, and the front had it at the bottom as well. So yeah, that is how I did it. I matched up what the stock ones were. Yeah, you can see it there at the bottom, and the same thing on the back. So that's how they go on. We'll see how the driver's side is. Hopefully it matches up that way, but just wanted to make sure that was clear. And driver's side is all installed, same as the passenger side. Lubed everything up, cleaned everything up. Weared bars are on the bottom on both sides, so we have a good match. So that is it as far as pads go. Next on the list will be the brake lines. So I went ahead, I just pumped up the pedal really good, made sure that, you know, everything is seated where it's supposed to be, moved whatever fluid had to move. So the first thing you want to do before you start bleeding or taking the assembly apart is make sure that you can get the bleeder screws open, because if you pop these lines off and you have problems with bleeder screws, then your world is just going to suck for the day. So I'm going to go around on all 4 corners, make sure I can loosen the bleeder screws. They are 10s on the rears and they are 11s on the fronts, and I'm just using a flare wrench to try and loosen those up. I'll see if the flare wrench does it. If it doesn't, I can go ahead and grab a regular socket. But yeah, I'm going to see and make sure everything loosens up. I'll be back once I've checked all 4 corners. All right, went around and confirmed I can open all the bleed screws, which I figured wouldn't be a problem. I will say on the rears, for some reason on the passenger side I was able to use the flare wrench, but on the driver's side it wouldn't fit in there, so I just had to use a regular 10mm box wrench, and it got in there no problem. It's just because of the design. I don't know why the other side seemed to fit, but I'll probably just use the box wrench on both, just in case that tab that's there would push the wrench out of the way or whatnot. So what I'm gonna do is I'm basically gonna start furthest from the front and work my way forward. So I'll start same order I did the brake pads and start getting lines swapped. So I'm gonna get all the tools I need, get over to the passenger rear and get started. All right, so I have everything handy. Replacement line, you can see how it kind of jogs in that direction, and that matches up how the factory line goes there. So that is how I'm gonna install it. The nut on this side, bolt, it's a 15mm head. And then the brake line up here, that is a 12mm that you're going to need to remove the flare nut from the actual line itself. So what I'm going to do is remove it from the caliper, get the new one installed on the caliper so I can run that line upward and, you know, keep the caliper from leaking too much fluid out of it. And then, you know, I will go ahead, loosen up here, and pop this line out and put the new line in place. I'm just trying to minimize the mess because this is never a fun job to do. Brake fluid normally gets everywhere. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. That is my plan of attack. We will see how it works out. All right, passenger side is in. A couple of notes. Yeah, you're using the same 15mm bolt here, so that's not a problem. In order to tighten this up here, you're gonna need a 19 to hold the new brake line, because it doesn't have like the hex flange or whatever that fits into this bracket, so you'll need to hold this with a 19 when tightening that 12. I made a little bit of a mess, not too bad. I had that bucket underneath to try and catch everything that was coming out, but And also, what I did is I made it so this will angle inward just based on the natural flex of the hose, so it's not rubbing on the tire. And eventually, once all is said and done, I'm going to zip tie the ABS line to that, and that'll help locate it a little bit more. But yeah, you just want to make sure that the hose isn't trying to go this way. You want it to try and go that way to avoid rubbing on the tire. So that is it for this side. I'm just going to spray the joints where everything kind of leaked a little bit with some brake parts cleaner to make sure that there's no residue eating away at paint. And then I can head over to the driver's side and do the same. All right, driver's rear is now in and done. This one went much smoother than the other side now that I knew what to expect. So all set here, everything's tightened, and I went ahead and wiped everything down with a little bit of brake clean just to make sure that no paint will be eaten away at. So now it is on to the fronts. So the fronts are a little more complicated based on this bracket you have here that holds it to the front axle. There's one bolt there that needs to come out. Looking at the orientation of the bracket, the line goes down from the bracket, and the two hoses that come in the kit are side specific. So this is going to be the driver's side because of the bracket down. The bolt is on that side. So the passenger side then will obviously be the other one with the hose down, the bolt holes on that side, and that is the side that has the banjo fitting. So this is the passenger side, the other one's the driver's side. So I'm going to go ahead, get all my tools together, get that nut loose, and then we can start working on this brake line. All right, so the bracket comes out here. It's a 10mm head on that bolt, and then it just pulls like that. And then I used a trim removal tool just to get these two fasteners out of there. Also unclipped the ABS lines where it was clipped on the brake line. And then lastly, there was a bracket that you saw this when I did my front suspension. There's one 15mm nut that holds that to the lower arm. The new lines do not have that bracket, so you won't need to reuse that. They only have the bracket that holds it in there behind the shock. As far as removing the line, I did verify that that is a 12mm flange nut as well, and then a 15mm that holds the banjo bolt in. And I did also confirm that that is a 19, just like the back, so it's all the same hardware as far as those things go. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do this basically the same way I did the back. I'm going to remove the banjo bolt from the caliper, put the new line on that to let this drain into my tub below, and then I'll work on swapping the new line into the fitting there and try and minimize the mess. So I will be back once all is done. Quick update as the process goes. I went ahead and I have that portion installed, walked it through. Before putting that bracket in place, I did attach the ABS wire to it. Make sure you have the ABS wire on top of the brake line. You'll figure it out as far as like the orientation goes. And I tightened that nut in place and put those retainer clips back on. So now that hose is just draped there waiting. And now I'm going to go ahead and loosen that fitting, get everything swapped over, and be done with this side. And there it is. Passenger side is in, all cleaned up. Again, I'll zip tie the ABS line to the brake line eventually once everything is bled and I'm happy. That'll be probably the last part of the job. So I'm going to go ahead and head over to the driver's side and get that one swapped out. Alright, so getting ready to start bleeding. What I want to do first is get all the old fluid out of here. So you can see my new setup has been attached and I've got it pumped up to 5 psi. So I'm going to go ahead, open the bleeder in the rear, see if I can get most of the fluid to come out. I'm not going to get it perfect, but I at least want to get it most of the way drained so as much of the old stuff is out as possible, and then I'll fill this with new fluid and start the bleeding procedure. Alright, got the master pretty much empty, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that cap, fill it up. This is what I'm using, Valvoline Synthetic DOT 3 and 4. I've used this on a lot of vehicles, really good fluid for the money, so I'm going to go ahead, get that filled up, and then start bleeding the rears. Alright, I just pressurized everything, opened this bleeder up again, made sure, I had this hose angled up, made sure everything wasn't coming out, no bubbles or anything, so we're good there. I'm going to go ahead, do the rest of the corners. I'm going to do driver's rear next, then passenger front, then driver front. Once all have been bled once and everything looks good, I'm going to go in, hammer the brake pedal multiple times, and then I'm going to go through the process again just one more time to make sure there's no bubbles left in the system, and also make sure none of my fittings are leaking where I replaced lines, and then that should be job done. And this is what you're looking for. It was bubbling, and now you're getting a solid stream of liquid coming through. I always cant the hose up like this just to see if I can see any bubbles pop up. I'll let it stream for a second or so, and then, for a few seconds, and then make sure there's no bubbles, and then close it and move on to the next. All right, all 4 corners have been bled, no bubbles. So what I'm going to do next is go ahead, remove this, put the actual cap on, get inside, hammer the brake multiple times, top it off, and then go through and do this process one more time just to double check, make sure there are no bubbles in the system. All right, and I went all the way around, bled every corner again. All of them were fine, no bubbles came out. So I went ahead, removed the pressure tool, topped off the reservoir, you can see it's at the max line, and put the cap back on. So next I'm going to go inside, pump up the brakes pretty good, get some pressure on them, and I'm going to start walking around and zip tying all the ABS lines to the brake lines, make sure that those are good and secure, and while I'm doing that I can check and make sure there's no leaks. After I bled each corner, I did spray everything down with brake clean again, everything that was disconnected and reconnected to make sure that there are no hydraulic leaks. So that's why I'll go ahead and get some pressure in the system and I'll double check everything. One thing I did forget to mention earlier, when I was doing the driver front corner, in order to get to this joint, I did have to use a trim tool and remove, this is the vent line from the front diff, had to remove that from this bracket just to get access. So just one little quick tip there. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead, get some pressure in the system, and then go corner by corner and start zip tying lines together. So here is what the rear looks like when all is said and done. Zip tied using the 3 isolators already on there. I also went ahead and removed the ABS sensor from here where it slides in and disconnected it up top, and also had to remove these clips from the frame. I'm leaving it loose, it's no longer attached to the frame, but then added one more zip tie up here. It just gives it a lot more play in case there is that extra sag, and it shouldn't rub on anything too bad. You know, the factory retainer clips right down the line there as well. So that's what I'm doing in the back. I also did check, no signs of any leaking from that fitting or the banjo bolt or the bleeder, so I put the cap back on. One corner down, I'm going to work my way over to the other rear, get that one done, and then move on to the fronts. Rears are done, and I just did the driver's side. I'm actually only going to attach one there because it is so much shorter than the line, and there's something holding up right there, so I'm not too worried about that little bit in the center. It's not going to flop and hit anything. So one zip tie there, and then this side is good to go as far as leaks and whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and do the last corner. One thing I did forget to mention is these are DOT rated, in case anybody is wondering. So these are fully street legal to use. I know some braided stainless lines are not. These ones, you are good to go. So I'm going to go do the last corner so I can call this job done. All right, everything is done as far as the brakes go. Very happy, no signs of leaks on any corners. So last thing to do before I get this thing on the ground is I'm going to rotate the tires, as I did not do that at my last oil change. So pretty straightforward. The rears are going to go straight forward, and then the fronts are going to go to the opposite rear corners. So I'm going to go ahead and get those installed, and then everything will be torqued to 130 foot-pounds, and then I can get this thing back on the ground. And then last thing will be take it for a test drive and bed in these new brakes, and hopefully be very happy with a job done. Back on the ground, everything torqued to spec. Just last thing is one little quick look over to make sure nothing's gonna rub anywhere. Everything's good as far as the fronts go. I already looked at the other side, and then I already looked at the rear, but just want to show you from behind what it looks like. You know, nothing's gonna hit a tire or anything like that. It all looks like plenty of clearance there, so all set as far as the job goes. Last thing on the list is going to be get cleaned up and then take it out for a quick drive, bed everything in, and make sure we're good to go. All right, well, all cleaned up and just got back from taking it for a drive. Previously mentioned bedding in the pads. That I guess is just stuck in my head from all of the Hawk racing pads I've used in the past. These pads, you don't need to bed them in. You actually, according to the instructions, only need to get rid of the old brake material facing on the rotor. They recommend using sandpaper and just going over it real quick to get that off. I obviously didn't do that since you watched the video. What I ended up doing was just taking a couple of slow starts and stops to make sure I had brakes, and then got it up to about 25 to 30, and then did a pretty aggressive brake, nothing too crazy. And by the third one, it was a completely different truck. It was stopping awesome. I've now driven it a couple times since then as well, and very, very impressed with the braking performance of the Hawk pads over the factory pads. So definitely recommend these pads if you're looking to get a nice upgrade to your brakes. So that being said, I am going to wrap up the video here. If you like what you're watching, you want to keep following along, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please hit the notification bell. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I do review them and I will reply. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.